Amanda Louisa from Perth, Australia.
Hello, thanks for having me, Sherry.
Oh, I'm so grateful to have you on. You and I were talking before the recording, and I told you that Perth, Australia is literally like the furthest point from where I live of almost anywhere in the world. And I love that, we share that. I've been there a few times, and so I love it there. And it's just fun to find you are connected to that area as well.
Yeah, it is a beautiful area. If you love the beach, it's definitely the place to come. And it's close to Bali, so if anybody wants to hop on over to
Pop
Bali,
over the pond, just to go over and
yeah,
pop over to Bali.
we're actually closer to Bali than we are to Sydney. So,
Oh, how interesting. I didn't realize that. I'm really horrible with geography. I mean, for all I know, Bali is like, anyway. I want to jump into how you transitioned from the corporate space, being an attorney, into what you're doing now, which is so up my alley. I'm absolutely in love with the fact that you're about feminine leadership coaching. So, how did that come to be?
I started in corporate and I found that the hustle culture was really turning me into somebody I didn't want to be. I was caffeinating. Literally, I would have like 6 to maybe 10 coffees a day. And I would get home and I would pound back half a bottle of wine. And then I would fall asleep. And then I'd wake up at like 5 a.m. to get to work at 7 a.m. because, the transit and commute. Um, and I'd do it all over again. And then come Friday, it would be, the drinks cart would come out in the law firm. We'd be pounding back drinks from about 4 p.m. And then there were days that I would, come home at 4 a.m. and not really remember how I got home. And I was like, this is not who I am. So I decided it was time for a shift and I requalified. I did my Master of Science in Sustainability Management and I moved into the environment sector. So I actually still work in the corporate sector. I'm working in a construction company, which is a really masculine
Wow.
dominated field.
Yeah.
But I'm working in a great company, but also it's so important to learn how to embody your feminine even in the midst of an energy that is very masculine, because you can change the energy in a room and
I love
remembering
that.
your power
So true.
is so important. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk about that, but first, I okay, so anyway, before I go to what I was going to go to, I jump around a lot, just like hopefully you can like track me. Um, but okay, so you were an attorney. You started to have this lifestyle that wasn't conducive maybe to like your soul path or just who you are. So you and then we find that typically people will go and develop habits or patterns um as a coping mechanism to when they're on the wrong path. They don't
Yeah.
actually have that realization. So it's cool you had that realization before it was maybe too late.
Yeah.
Um, so pivoting now into feminine leadership. Did you feel diminished as a woman when you were an attorney? Did you feel like you had to work harder or what were your
All
feelings?
the time. Our cohort when I was at law school was probably 57% women to men. And then you finish law school, you manage to get into a law firm, which when I was coming in was really competitive. And then you look at the hierarchy, and as you're getting to partner level, there's basically no women.
Hmm.
So you can see that there's a ceiling there.
Do you
There's
think
a
that's a
class gap
global thing? I know it's not, I know it's a US thing and it sounds like an Australian thing. Do you think that's happening everywhere?
everywhere. I read an article by I'm gonna say UN Women, and I might be wrong on that, but it was saying that because of the pandemic, the the amount that women have been put back is about 267 years before we'll reach gender parity.
Oh,
Um, it's
yikes.
horrifying, right? Like we've been fighting for just given equal opportunities, and it's
Yeah.
still so far away. I mean, especially with everything happening at the moment in the US, you can just see how the patriarchy is still trying to dig its
Yeah, to
claws
keep
and
its
control us.
haunches and everything because there's this disruption happening. I'm hopeful that time is speeding up so we won't have to wait that those hundreds of years.
I
But
hope
I'm
so.
also a realist. I mean, I feel like the women who are waking up right now are the ones who will be the pioneering shift in at least the energy of this, if not in practice and in walk and talk. And is that why you shifted into feminine leadership as a coaching model?
Exactly.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
I can you can feel the energy shift, and I feel so passionate and so inspired by providing women with that comfort and that kind of almost a safe haven where they can fully heal what they need to heal to be able to step into those positions, to go into politics, into leadership, where we really need to be having a voice. And I hear that saying, oh, if you don't have a voice, just bring a chair to the table. And it's quite a dismissive saying that doesn't take into account the generational trauma that people have in their systems, the fear that people have in their systems. It's not simply bring a chair to the table and make yourself be heard, because if the people around the table don't value you, you can
Right.
scream as loud as you want and you are not going to be heard. I've had that happen in so many situations where I've said something, and how many women are going to experience this? I was in a big meeting and we were talking about climate change, and I don't remember what I said, but I said something. Nobody responded. Literally seconds later, the man next to me said exactly the same
Oh,
thing,
that's happened to me too.
verbatim. And everybody was like, yeah, that's really, and I was just like, really?
Hello.
Really?
That's
So,
happened to me in like settings, so many settings too. More specifically, what comes to mind when you bring that up is like sitting in like a church, like a religion. For my church of origin, we would have these committee meetings for various things, and I would come representing the women, and I would be in a minority because most of them there are leading men, because women don't lead men, they only lead other women and children. But anyway, in this setting, I my viewpoint was sort of downplayed, or when, like you said, or when a man said the exact same thing, they were concurring, like, oh, you're right. So it's almost like having to work twice as hard to be heard.
yeah,
I love your analogy of, just because you are at the table and it doesn't mean you have equal representation or equal power to wield your voice, because in times past, which I want to get to next, women have been hurt literally
yeah.
for using their voice. This is the intergenerational trauma. And you and I talked before about, or just before we started recording, about how we're both working on books
Yeah.
and we're meeting this. Do you want to speak to that resistance that we feel when we're getting ready to wield our voices, whether through written word or spoken word?
So until 1967 in the UK, you could still be fined as a woman if you were in public and speaking loudly, or creating a disruption. In the 1800s, until the very late 1800s, early 1900s, they had this thing called a scold that husbands could put on their wives
A
if
what?
their wives nagged them. So a scold, you have to Google this. It's the most horrifying thing
How
you've
do you
seen.
spell it? Oh my gosh.
SCOLD.
Wow.
And it's a metal device like the man in the iron mask that they put on a woman to shut her up. So this is
Whoa.
trauma that is in our system. Research shows that trauma is inherited for at least 3 generations. So because obviously humans, it's really hard to do generational studies because we have longer lives.
Mm-hmm.
Mice are the closest genetic match to humans. So they've done the study in mice, and because we've had 3 generations of humans since World War II, we've also been able to do a study with that. And what they can see is, for sure, at least 3 generations of trauma is inherited in our DNA.
Is that the
So
cherry blossom study?
I'm not sure which one
Oh,
it is. This wasn't like I was reading some research from a book called It Didn't Start With You.
yes, that's the study.
Yes.
So fascinating.
Incredible, right? And so if you think about it, for how many centuries we've been carrying this fear of speaking out, or this fear of physical retribution and even social isolation if we spoke out. Even during, the suffragette movement, the women who were fighting for voters' rights, for women to be able to vote, were ostracized by their community.
Yeah.
In a lot of
Yeah.
ways, they weren't accepted because the patriarchy is so internalized. You don't need necessarily men to suppress women. We do it to ourselves sometimes because we've got that trauma running through our system, and it's safer for the community to stay quiet and to stay small. And that's what we need to start breaking.
Mm. That actually gives me chills. I mean, whether or not you believe in past lives or even ancestral trauma, some people just literally don't believe in inheriting ancestral trauma, even though there's very strong medical research that supports it, like
Yeah.
epigenetics and things. It's still very compelling that that's still happening right now in real time in different
Yeah.
parts of the world and in homes. I actually know women who are literally being silenced by their partners or their husbands. And I still see, like we're talking about, you're seeing it in the corporate world. I saw it in the religious space where for some reason, and I don't know if it's a threat to the toxic masculine that we have this egalitarian, society,
Yeah.
but as we were starting this conversation, there's this stronghold or something that the patriarchy sees as women being disruptors of. Why do you think that is? What are we bringing in? I have my own ideas, but I'm super curious about yours. Like, what are we bringing in that might be suspect or maybe threatening to the establishment?
I think it's freedom. I think it's freedom to be ourselves and not fit into a box. And when people are so conscious of fitting into a box to fit into society and belonging is such a core human need. We do whatever we can, and we're so programmed by the media, by what we see, to, oh, you need this to be able to be really respectable, or you need to be seen to be doing this to be at this level and fit into this part of society.
Yeah.
So we're hustling and we're trying to get into that like prestige
Like
area,
the
and
hierarchy, like a
it's a hierarchy, like
stratification.
how do
Yeah.
I get there? And the feminine is really about be happy being
Hmm.
here in community. And it's not like it's going to disrupt all structures. It's going to take away the colonialism. It's going to take away the colonial paradigm, the capitalist paradigm, the patriarchal paradigm, and there is an elite few that are really benefiting from it.
They're
And
not going to go out without kicking and screaming, right?
exactly, and you can see that happening.
Well, because they control most of the world's wealth.
Exactly.
And from a macrocosm perspective, from the microcosm, that's still trickling down, even irrespective of wealth. It's about power.
Yes.
And you can see that power dismantling too. I think we're going to see some major unraveling events very soon and in the coming
Yeah.
decades.
Yeah.
It's exciting,
2020
Nicole.
started it.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to circle back to, because this is also fascinating with the patriarchy and everything. I love talking about this stuff. But what what have you seen from when you talked about embodying the feminine? We talk about this a lot on the podcast, and I love different vantage points of how you bring that into your coaching as well as to your own body and your own
Yeah.
experience. So how do you source that? How does that look like for you embodying that, especially in the male construction industry?
I know. So I like working with feminine archetypes. I find archetypes are really a blueprint of how we see and interact with the world. You could say seductress, and immediately you'll have in your mind what that looks like and what that embodies. When we look at leaders, you don't see many feminine leaders out there. You don't see representations of fully embodied women. You might have a few. Michelle Obama comes to mind straight away as somebody who I feel is very feminine and embodied,
Yeah.
in how she speaks and how she comes across and how she presents herself, whether you agree with her or not. She holds space fully. She's present, and she really embodies that full nurturing empress energy. So when I started diving into leadership, and especially from a feminine aspect, I was looking around to see, okay, well, how can I model this? How does that look? How does that feel inside my body? And I couldn't find anything that was feminine. That was just men. And, you know, to get to the next level, you had to disown so many parts of yourself. I remember I was in a leadership workshop at a previous workplace, and we were working on how we present to a board. And I stepped forward and I did my presentation, and the female leader of the group turned around to me and was giving me feedback. And she said, you know, you stand like with your hand on your hips, and you kind of like, the way I was standing was too feminine. What I was wearing was too feminine. How I spoke was too feminine. Literally, she was telling me, you have to become more masculine to get ahead if you want to be taken seriously. And
I have been told that too. Yep.
So yes, and seeing that in a masculine dominated industry where I am, I think I'm lucky because I work in a workplace that, even though it's predominantly male, we have a workplace culture that values vulnerability. And it starts with that there's quite a bit of spirituality in the leadership group. And that's trickling down. And we've got a structure that is very much, even though it's tier one construction company, you know, it's a global big company, they actually talk about things like spirituality and health and, you know, making time for your family and having a flexible work arrangement. But in previous places, you know, I've just been surrounded by such a toxic, if you're not at your desk for, you know, 12 hours, obviously you don't want that promotion. And the amount of times I used to see people just sitting at their desk and not really doing work, but they're just there.
Yeah. Not being, yeah.
They're not productive. There's no output. They're on their phone, or they're, you know, on a website.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
So with this, I know you talked about your academic background shifted to sustainability, like eco-sustainability. How have you seen that interplay with the feminine?
I find that both nature and the environment and women have been suppressed, subjugated, vilified, and objectified by the patriarchy. And there's such a parallel between how commodified we have created this biodiverse system called Mother Earth, and how we've literally done that to women as well. And the more you cut up something or someone, or the less value they have to you, where we're not valued. And I'm speaking in terms of women as the feminine, which is a different topic, but in the context, that's, yeah. It's
absolutely, yeah. It's almost like what we've done to Mother Earth is what we've done to the feminine, like what you're saying. It's so interesting. Every time I talk to cool thought leaders like you who are all about promoting the feminine, and we're not really talking about dismantling men, we're talking about the patriarchy, right? Because I know you get that. But it's so interesting how all of us have come back to the place of like, it really is coming back to Mother Earth. It's coming back to the very simple connection we have to the elements and to nurturing that, the environment and the sustainability of, you know, food, everything from what we eat of the earth to the water to, and I used to think that I'm really embarrassed to admit that I used to just, because I think I was buying into more of a masculine paradigm, like that the earth owes us, like man subdues the earth, mankind. And that, you know, I don't know, I always thought of it as this endless resource that I was entitled to, versus, hey, things are not lined up that way. We are stewards of this earth and we're visitors here. And if we want our children and their children and their children and their children to have a sustainable, beautiful earth to live on, we are responsible for that. So I'm really embarrassed to admit that I bought into that very patriarchal, like capitalist, I don't even know, like divide and conquer, dare I say, colonization mindset.
It is. It is. And it's so integrated into the way we do business. Like if you think about it, we've completely normalized treating corporations as legal people, but the idea of giving earth rights, which is a full movement in the legal system, in the legal space, up to the UN at the moment, is thought of as ridiculous. Like, why would we give the earth rights? Well, why are you giving an inanimate non-body rights in a corporation? What's the difference between a living, breathing entity that's earth as an ecosystem, the interconnected, way we interrelate with the earth? Why is that more ridiculous to give that rights than to give a corporation that's, a created make-believe entity rights under the law?
Yes, good. That's a really good point. I look at how peoples have been subjugated and subdued, and like the Native Americans here in the US, right?
Yeah.
All the indigenous people of Australia, I know the Aboriginal tribes, and just it's endless. And I don't know, I'm just coming into more of an awareness of how the coming generations are going to be affected at greater levels than past generations have, even, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, it's just coming more into an awareness of how I'm part of that. Yeah. And it hasn't been fun waking up to that, I have to say.
No, it's overwhelming. I think we're already so overwhelmed with what we're facing in the world, and what we're seeing happening. The dismantling of old paradigms is disruptive, and it can be chaotic. And already our nervous system, a sense of safety within our own bodies is in threat. We're kind of in that fight flight mode, right, constantly. And then we're looking at what's happening with our ecosystem and the fact that our very life support system is failing, and the people in power are just kind of looking the other way. Of course, it feels overwhelming, and you dissociate when there's too much that your system can't take it anymore. So you go into scroll, or you go into binge watching Netflix, or your coping mechanisms come out because you actually can't cope. So being able to regulate and find safety when you're seeing so much disruption and so much, we've got such a sense of powerlessness of how do we change this? It comes back to us and finding that safety within ourselves before we can take that action.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it feels, you talk about, and I'm just going to quote you, this is what you sent me: one of the key barriers of women stepping into positions of power and leadership is the intergenerational trauma running through our systems. And you did talk earlier about that 3-generational thing and the epigenetics involved in that. So with that, and you just spoke to it, it's how we're individually dealing with our own embodied trauma. That is going to shift things. It's almost like one individual at a time. And it's going to, I don't know if you study Carl Jung or any of the collective unconscious stuff, but like when one person shifts, it really does impact all of us for the better.
It does.
Absolutely. So how have you found, let's just say somebody is experiencing a trigger. Maybe they walked into a position where they had to use, or they wanted to use their voice and they got shut down. Or they wanted to be standing in their power and they felt the rug ripped out from under them. How do we regain that? What are some ways that you've found, maybe in your coaching with those in feminine leadership? How have you found to kind of get that back, get our power back, get our voice back?
Get our power back. I find bringing safety back into our body, because I feel like we go into those situations and, we experience that, somebody just attacks us in the boardroom, or, gets quite aggressive, and your whole system goes into a bit of shock, right? Like, I know I feel quite panicky, and my hands get sweaty, and I don't know what to say. And it really comes back to finding systems to help you just bring that down and gently. I do the hold, the one hand on your belly, one hand on your heart. And then finding the words to just gently bring the inner child that's triggered by that into a sense of safety. And there's so many exercises that you have depending on where your nervous system is and which part of overwhelm you are, whether it's fight, flight, or freeze, to regulate yourself back into a sense of I'm safe, I'm okay, it's going to be all right, you know, nothing's going to happen, you're not going to be physically hurt here. And then finding the right way to come and approach that person later on, because obviously in the moment
you want to
that's not
teach
the
them.
time.
Like, yeah, I love it, because you want to, some people are aghast. They have no idea that they're doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're like, you have to realize that we're all, you know, brought up with people who, not to blame our parents, but they didn't know any better than what they knew. And so they've, you know, passed down maybe limiting beliefs or ways of thinking that aren't conducive to the society we want to build. And it's not about attacking them. It's about creating that space of vulnerability and really going, okay, well, you know, when we had that conversation the other day, I felt really whatever. I felt really threatened when you said this because it was quite aggressive. And it really made me feel unsafe. And I would really like if we could work together to find a new way to speak to each other that really makes us both feel heard, because I thought this was really valuable when you said this, but maybe the delivery can be changed. And it's really empowering us to have those conversations about expressing our needs and setting our boundaries, because we're not taught to do that, especially as women.
Yeah.
And when we teach something as simple as, you know, here's a structure you can use to have those difficult conversations, that structure that I have, that 10 steps, has helped me in personal relationships, it's helped me in boardroom relationships, it's helped me in so many areas.
Yeah. And maybe
finding that way.
So is this kind of what your blueprint of feminine leadership sort of embodies, those 10 steps?
Yeah, of how to have a conversation when you're triggered. And when it comes to embodying feminine leadership, it really is about learning the 7 archetypes of the feminine. So you've got the maiden, which is really about learning to be vulnerable and learning that it's okay to be vulnerable in a office situation. We're taught that, you know, making mistakes is not okay, or we can't admit if we don't know something, just buck up and try and, you know, figure it out yourself. But when I've worked in workplaces with female leaders who have very clearly, like in a meeting, told me, oh yeah, actually, I'm not too sure about that. Let me go check it out and I'll get back to you. Or a masculine leader who has said something wrong in a meeting, not something super offensive. Well, actually, it kind of was. He said something and it was kind of inappropriate. It was more like a barroom joke than a meeting joke. We all laughed and we moved on. But later that day, he sent us an email and he said, I am so sorry, everybody, for what I said. I said X, Y, Z. It was really inappropriate. I'm really sorry if I had anybody, you know, it's not how a leader should behave. He took full accountability for that. And the vulnerability to take accountability to your whole team of like 100 something people and say, I made a mistake, I'm owning up, I'm really sorry. If we had leaders in power doing that, my God, what a difference the world would be.
Most hierarchical, patriarchal entities do not apologize. It's sort of their, I don't want to say their standard or their policy. It's just like, they'll go back to the middlemen and try to navigate it through that way, but they as a whole will not say we were wrong.
Yeah.
I'm aghast at that. So I know we could keep talking about all of these things in depth. I want to kind of wrap up with the shadow and light aspects of feminine leadership outside the context of patriarchy, because that's something that you teach. And then I would love for people to know how to attach to your offerings, and we can kind of work through that whole blueprint thing. But yeah, what are these shadow and light aspects as we're going into these archetypes and these leadership models? I'm super intrigued by that.
So I find that there's 7 feminine archetypes. Obviously, archetypes, there are thousands because humans are pretty complex, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I've got a Carolyn Myss archetype deck. Do you have that one?
Yes, I do. So a lot of my work with the feminine archetypes are based on Carl Jung and Carolyn Myss. Like they were quite foundational to my understanding of archetypes and how I've kind of tapped into those energies personally and how I find them to work with my clients and with what I teach. So I say that there's 7 feminine archetypes that are linked to our chakra systems. The maiden, which is all about vulnerability, really tapping into that innocence, that ability to say you're wrong, to discover that curiosity. Then there's the lover archetype, which is about creativity. It's, you know, the life force that flows through us.
Sorry, what was
We've
that
got
again? There was a little breakup. So after the maiden, it was
the lover.
the lover. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So the lover is really about creativity and that life force that flows through us. And that's, you know, how we relate to the world and to our own bodies. The warrioress is the advocate. She's all about courage, the courage to stand up. And I think that's an archetype that we don't always play with very well.
Yeah.
And then we've got the mother, which is about compassion and nurturing. Then we've got the empress, which is really about collaboration and community. The crone archetype, which is about visioning.
I prefer the term wise woman with that one.
Wise woman. I like
it
crone,
too.
and I think
it's just that some people are just used to this old biddy, like they get this visual of this like lady, like Snow White, the lady that gave Snow White the apple. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, the evil, like witchy crone, as opposed to, you know, somebody who's aged and has wisdom in that beauty. And then the creatrix, which is about transformation.
Ooh,
And
yeah.
each of these archetypes have light aspects, which are when you're fully embodied and you've integrated some of the parts that, you know, society frowns upon.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in the maiden archetype, you know, being the maiden, again, like, as a term that can go one of both ways, right? You can see the maiden as innocence and beauty, and you can see the maiden as vulnerable and reliant on people to do things for her.
Yeah,
So,
I've heard actually that the toxic masculine or the patriarchy wants women to stay in perpetual maidenhood, like the perpetual toxic maiden, as you know, the
yes,
shadow attribute of the maiden, dependent on them.
absolutely. And you know, it's when we start, like Carl Jung says, when we start, you know, disowning parts of ourselves, or we don't acknowledge parts of ourselves, and they have power over our life, right? They're able to manipulate things around us without us knowing, because they're patterns that we're in that we don't even recognize that we're in.
Yes.
Yeah. So
That's
each of them
beautiful.
have shadow and light. Yeah.
I love archetypes too. And I think I really relate to the priestess archetype. I don't know if you dove into that too much. I know it's not necessarily a Carolyn Myss thing, but it's just that this idea of this very embodied feminine healer / wise woman / medicine woman, who is not necessarily a warrior, although she could step into that, but it's more just this like awakener of the feminine who embodies her own essence and brings that.
I get chills when you're talking about it. Yeah. Yeah. I love that archetype.
Well, you are just a wealth of fun things. I mean,
I
even just
forever.
I love other people who nerd out on archetypes and feminine leadership, because it really is going to take women owning our own bodies, our own voice, creating our own safety, as you're talking about, with this just moment by moment practice of just managing your energy and managing how you're dealing with your triggers and your own intergenerational trauma. I used to think we had to know exactly what the trauma is to heal it, but you're shaking your head. I know that you probably don't feel that way either now. It's just like, no, we don't have to sit in therapy for years and analyze and whatever. It's just like, here's the emotion. I don't have to know the story behind it. Sometimes it's helpful though, but I don't have to know the story behind it. I just know that I'm moving forward with this. I'm catalyzing this in myself, and I'm drawing from it what I need to in a healthy way so I can move forward and step into my own power.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think there is, it can be quite dangerous for people to, I'm trying to find a nice way to say this. There's a lot of work out there, and I think people need to be really conscious and do their research about who they're going to for trauma work, because I I know there are some practices that are really great, but if you have underlying trauma, they're not, like breath work. I love breath work, and I really think it's a great activity, and it can really help regulate you. However, I see so many people getting re-traumatized by doing it because they've got trauma that they haven't created a sense of safety around. So
Yes.
going every week and doing like a big release is actually just re-traumatizing your
Oh my
entire
gosh,
system.
that's
It's not
so
bringing safety
interesting.
in.
I totally agree. I'm just going to give you a little snapshot example of that. I went to Costa Rica last year, February of 2021, to do 4 nights in a row of ayahuasca. And in between every night, we did breath work, um, book ending, I should say, not piggybacking, but book ending. So 4 nights. So 1 night of breath work, 4 nights of ayahuasca, 1 night of breath work.
Yeah.
And even before we started the night before we started the ayahuasca, just the first breathwork night, there was a woman next to me who literally went into a trauma state just from breathwork. There were probably about 50 of us there. And it's a good thing I was next to her. I just held her hand and she literally just almost went into a state of shock.
Shit.
So it set the stage for her not having so positive of a week because it unearthed some things. And I thought that was really interesting. That was just breath work. That's before we actually did the medicine. And I know ayahuasca in and of itself is not for everyone. It can provoke the same exact thing you're talking about.
Yeah.
It can put you into a state where it can bring things up that you maybe aren't equipped to handle. But thank you for saying that about breath work. Unless you have a very
Yeah.
conscious, trained, aware facilitator who can give everyone one-on-one support.
Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you for saying that, because sometimes you get into these big, 50, 60 people in a room, and you need to have somebody you can co-regulate with, especially if you've got a lot of trauma running through that you've not worked on before.
Yeah.
I've seen something similar happen in a womb healing kind of environment. And the facilitator obviously had no awareness of trauma, because she was there saying, okay, partner up with these 4 other women that you've never met and have no connection to, and let's talk about your womb traumas.
Oh, no, thank you.
Excuse me?
Like, oh,
No.
well, I'm sure you see this too. Like, there's so many people awakening right now, and they go right into being a facilitator because they just want to help people.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, I'm more a fan now of these smaller settings because the
Yes.
energy can get so big when you have group release and, like you said, pairing with people who don't have a connection to each other. That can actually exacerbate trauma. They don't feel safe, number one, because they don't know these people. And number two, you haven't established that safety and trust
Yeah.
factor. So, oh my gosh. Okay, Amanda, where can people find you online and take part of what you're offering, especially with that blueprint for feminine leadership?
Yeah, so I have a workbook. So it's a nervous system regulation workbook, which has 9 activities. It's free. It's on my website, which is www.amandalouisa.com.au. So there's a .au at the end
And
of
I'll
the doc.
definitely put that in the show notes for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and there'll be a link to the nervous system regulation exercises. And there's another freebie out there, which is a 10-page book that really guides you through how to set your intentions, how to really figure out what you want out of life, and how to start really cultivating that safety within yourself to bring that into reality. So that 10-page workbook is available as well. So I'll shoot you through the link if that's not already with you.
Yeah, I've got it right here. I love it. So yeah, this is so aligned with what I offer in my Stand, Speak, Shine. And I think nervous system regulation is where it's at. I think that we've come to a time where that is screaming to be like a number one priority for people in their daily lives,
Yeah.
especially with the strong uptick. And I think that the next wave of COVID is actually emotional. I'm sure you agree with that.
I do.
So
Yeah.
I will definitely put that in their show notes. And thank you so much for your presence today and your offerings. I've loved this discussion.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been amazing. Yeah, I could speak for hours with you about this.
Same.
So
Same. We'll
nice to
have to
have
carry it
somebody
on
else.
after off air.
Yeah. All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you.